Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today, we're going to share Dogman Encounter horror stories. First story, Giant Black Dog. Let me preface this by saying I'm not really a skeptic, but I look for the logical reasoning on everything first and foremost, and frankly think 99% of paranormal stuff has a logical/scientific explanation. But here's my thing. Lately, I've been noticing glimpses of what I can only describe as a large black dog. So far, I've never been able to see the entire thing, and frustratingly, it's always something I think can be explained away logically, but I find it strange it's always a dog, so if you guys that are into this have an explanation, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It started a month ago when I was closing alone at work. It's a two-people job, but someone was sick, so I was exhausted. And as I was washing dishes from the very corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something black. It was like the top of a dog, going from the shoulders down to the tail, but I didn't see the head nor legs, counterblocked it, and it walked behind a wall, so I quickly lost sight of it. Less than a second. I double-checked, but of course nothing. Second time it happened once again when I was closing alone, and I was in the same spot, the sink, around the same area. Mind you, I was even more exhausted this time and sleep-deprived, but this time I caught a glimpse of its entire top side, as I saw a downward-facing ear, except this time I saw it walk by a stool and heard the stool move, but didn't see it move. This one is even more frustrating because I checked, and the stool was out of place, but I could have just forgotten to put it back in place after a customer sat. And as I said, I only heard it move, didn't see it. Normally, with just two instances, I wouldn't care less, but last night, I awoke in the middle of the night to a singular loud bark. Once again, this can be explained as me being in the middle of a dream, nothing really supernatural. To me, this all sounds like exhaustion, especially as I've been very stressed lately in life. However, the only peculiar thing to me is that it's always a dog. To the believers, is there anything related to dogs in the supernatural? I always hear stuff about ghosts being like humans, not animals. And to the skeptic, can hallucinations be consistent? I tried looking up dog hauntings, but all I got was stuff about DOGMAN, which I think is more like a cryptic or skinwalker or something. But I'd appreciate insight on this. I'd rather just know rather than be in a limbo. Second story, DOGMAN/Wolfman sighting on the Oregon coast. I've heard of this sort of thing, but only briefly. I've never really thought much of it, nor have I ever done any reasonable research into this. I figured this might be a good place to start. I'm cross-posting my story from the r/Dogman sub. This is a really odd story of how I came to see a literal dogman last night. Repost 3 nights ago, around midnight. I live in a neighborhood, by the way, but we are on the edge of a large forest behind our house, so not completely rural. Funny part of the story. So, I set a live trap for a mouse last night. Catch and release, I can't stand to harm mice. It triggered at midnight, and the loud pop of the door woke me up. I decided I didn't want to just leave it in the cage all night long waiting for morning. I could hear him trying to chew through the wires and didn't want him to torture himself or get hurt attempting to get out. So, I decided I'd just take him outside immediately. Instead of releasing mice in the yard by my house, I always go about 3 miles away into a forested area. I'm not cruel enough to just release him by someone else's house, thus causing them a mouse problem. Irrelevant info, I know. Anyway, before I even got in my car to transport the little mouse, my stomach began hurting like never before. It was a horrible, foreboding feeling that was almost telling me something terrible was about to happen. There was no reason for my stomach to just suddenly start screaming in pain. I essentially never have stomach problems like this. It's exceedingly rare, I just don't get stomach aches. But this was painful on a scale that was so strange. I kept getting this deep sense of something being wrong. I got into the car with the little cage. Going down the street, it was literally only 1 block away from my home that I instantly slowed on the brakes because of something enormous at the side of the road. At first I thought, well, that's got to be the tallest dog I've ever seen. Its silhouette was blacker than the night. As I slowed my car from maybe 20 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour, it suddenly came out into the streetlight and walked across the street in front of my car. It wasn't running, but it wasn't going slow either. I suddenly realized it was no ordinary dog, but I knew it wasn't a bear either because it didn't have much of a belly. This was 3 to 4 times the size of a wolf, and so I can confirm it was not a wolf. What I saw looked like a humanoid literally hunched over on all fours, back erect in a hunch, moving with pace across the road. The head was distinctly wolf-like and enormous. Literally looked like a giant wolf head. The being had jet black fur, as black as hair can get. The legs were lanky. My brain literally froze. Instantly, I began rationalizing, but it was fairly impossible to rationalize what I had just seen. The closest thing I can compare this to would be the werewolf from Harry Potter that Professor Lupin turns into. Link there. All I can think of is, how did they know? That's nearly identical to what this thing looks like as it's hunched over and walking on all fours. It's horrifying. It was literally quite accurate to looking like that exact CGI rendering. On all fours, its backside probably about 4 to 4.5 feet in height. The head higher, easily reaching 5 feet. Again, there was no way this was a bear or other regular beast we're familiar with as humans. There was nothing familiar about it. To anyone who might say, maybe it was just a really large dog that was sick and hunched, definitely no. It was bigger than the largest dog breeds I've ever seen. To be over 4 feet in height at the back, not the head, while hunched over, definitely not a regular dog. Impossible to be a bear, as none are this skinny. The humanoid aspect of it could not be denied. You could tell that if it wanted to, it could have easily stood up on 2 legs. What's more insane is that I could feel its energy. The energy was dark, oppressive, and really just a sense of danger swept over me. It had a very otherworldly energy about it. To continue, I slowly continued driving and quickly stared over to the left side of the road as I was passing to see where it had gone. I was able to see its silhouette by a bush, looking back at me, watching me pass. I didn't want to stop. I was scared. I went on with my mission to release the mouse. But I can tell you this, when I got home, I ran into my garage and shut that garage door as quickly as possible. I was panicked, truly terrified. When you know what you saw, you know what you saw, they always say. I also know my mind didn't just fill in blanks or hallucinate this. Last night, I looked up stories of dogmen, only to find people's descriptions/drawings were fairly identical to what I had witnessed. What are the odds of that? Now I am convinced it is real. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd see something like this. Does anyone know how common Oregon sightings are? And has anyone ever heard of an Oregon coast sighting? I'm also curious if anyone else has ever heard of literally getting sick to your stomach or not feeling well just before the encounter. Third story, Dogman/Wolfman sighting on the Oregon coast. This is a really odd story of how I came to see a literal dogman 3 nights ago. Around midnight. I live in a neighborhood, by the way, but we are on the edge of a large forest behind our house. So not completely rural. Funny part of the story. So, I set a live trap for a mouse last night. Catch and release, I can't stand to harm mice. It triggered at midnight, and the loud pop of the door woke me up. I decided I didn't want to just leave it in the cage all night long waiting for morning. I could hear him trying to chew through the wires and didn't want him to torture himself or get hurt attempting to get out. So, I decided I'd just take him outside immediately. Instead of releasing mice in the yard by my house, I always go about 3 miles away into a forested area. I'm not cruel enough to just release him by someone else's house, thus causing them a mouse problem. Irrelevant info, I know. Anyway, before I even got in my car to transport the little mouse, my stomach began hurting like never before. It was a horrible, foreboding feeling that was almost telling me something terrible was about to happen. There was no reason for my stomach to just suddenly start screaming in pain. I essentially never have stomach problems like this. It's exceedingly rare, I just don't get stomach aches. But this was painful on a scale that was so strange. I kept getting this deep sense of something being wrong. I got into the car with the little cage, going down the street. It was literally only 1 block away from my home that I instantly slowed on the brakes because of something enormous at the side of the road. At first I thought, well, that's got to be the tallest dog I've ever seen. Its silhouette was blacker than the night. As I slowed my car from maybe 20 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour, it suddenly came out into the street light and walked across the street in front of my car. It wasn't running, but it wasn't going slow either. I suddenly realized it was no ordinary dog, but I knew it wasn't a bear either because it didn't have much of a belly. This was 3 to 4 times the size of a wolf, and so I can confirm it was not a wolf. What I saw looked like a humanoid literally hunched over on all fours, back erect in a hunch, moving with pace across the road. The head was distinctly wolf-like and enormous. Literally looked like a giant wolf head. The being had jet black fur, as black as hair can get. The legs were lanky. My brain literally froze. Instantly, I began rationalizing, but it was fairly impossible to rationalize what I had just seen. The closest thing I can compare this to would be the werewolf from Harry Potter that Professor Lupin turns into. Link there. All I can think of is, how do they know? That's nearly identical to what this thing looks like as it's hunched over and walking on all fours. It's horrifying. It was literally quite accurate to looking like that exact CGI rendering. On all fours, its backside probably about 4 to 4.5 feet in height. The head higher, easily reaching 5 feet. Again, there was no way this was a bear or other regular beast we're familiar with as humans. There was nothing familiar about it. To anyone who might say, maybe it was just a really large dog that was sick and hunched. Definitely no. It was bigger than the largest dog breeds I've ever seen. To be over 4 feet in height at the back, not the head, while hunched over, definitely not a regular dog. Impossible to be a bear as none are this skinny. The humanoid aspect of it could not be denied. You could tell that if it wanted to, it could have easily stood up on 2 legs. What's more insane is that I could feel its energy. The energy was dark, oppressive, and really just a sense of danger swept over me. It had a very otherworldly energy about it. To continue, I slowly continued driving and quickly stared over to the left side of the road as I was passing to see where it had gone. I was able to see its silhouette by a bush looking back at me, watching me pass. I didn't want to stop. I was scared. I went on with my mission to release the mouse. But I can tell you this, when I got home, I ran into my garage and shut that garage door as quickly as possible. I was panicked, truly terrified. When you know what you saw, you know what you saw. They always say. I also know my mind didn't just fill in blanks or hallucinate this. Last night, I looked up stories of dogmen only to find people's descriptions/drawings were fairly identical to what I had witnessed. What are the odds of that? Now I'm convinced it is real. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd see something like this. Does anyone know how common Oregon sightings are? And has anyone ever heard of an Oregon coast sighting? I'm also curious if anyone else has ever heard of literally getting sick to your stomach or not feeling well just before the encounter. 4th story, Skinwalker birthday surprise. I live on a reservation. I'm almost 19 now. I was 17 at the time, and it's always been a standing rule that we can't leave our house after sunset. There's always been bad things happening. People going missing, animals going missing, animals showing up, and mutilated animals. Weird stuff. I was allowed to have a few friends over for my birthday party. I was really excited because this land is beautiful, and I always like to show it off. 3 of my friends made it up here, 2 boys and a girl. I'll just refer to them as Boy 1, etc. We went for a long walk up the mountain a little ways from the residential because the view up there is amazing, and even though it was getting on dusk, I figured we'd be fine. There's 4 of us all in a group together, and we've got hiking sticks with the spears at the end, and it's only a 20-minute walk there and back. Boy 1 saw the end of a goat, but it was missing a tail, and it looked injured. We tried to get closer to see if it was all right because all the goats around these parts are owned, but as we got closer, it made a really loud, low bleat and ran over the ridge. Boy 1 and I ran off the track after it and looked over the ridge. It disappeared. We stopped so we could hear which direction it was running to, but there was no noise at all. I thought it was a bit weird, and the sun was disappearing faster than I thought, so we started to head back. My friends would always laugh at the rules my family has about going outside at night, but they were about to find out why we have that rule, and I was about to get a fresh reminder. Boy 1 was leading us with his phone light. It wasn't that dark that we couldn't see in front of us, but the trail has drops and rocks, and because of the bushes to the sides of us, it made it really hard to see our feet. There was this giggle in front of us. We stopped because it was really close. It sounded like a turkey gobble, which is uncommon in my area. It happened a few more times after that. The sound gave me goosebumps because it didn't sound right at all. The next thing we saw still plays with my head. Going from left to right across the path was this thing my heart jumped into my throat. It looked like a large coyote, but its limbs were mutilated like it was crossed between human with sharp, long claws. Its face looked distorted and human, but it was animalistic at the same time, and it had really long teeth. The scariest part is the way it moved. It was rocking back and forth on all fours like a praying mantis. It'd just take a step and rock backwards and forwards, and then lurch another step forward. Its head was bowed down in between its shoulders. None of us moved for what seemed like a couple of minutes, just watching it jolt itself across the path. It looked like it was just going to go past us and leave us alone until the girl started crying and freaking out. The animal flung its head in her direction and made a really low growl, sort of like a house cat, because it had the voice behind it as well. It twisted its body around and started coming at us. It was terrifying. I yelled and threw down my spear at its head, but it was like it bounced off. When it got to me, it stood up. It was so tall. It barged into me, making me fall down. It started hiccuping and lurching, and then it barged into Boy 1. It backed into Boy 2, and he landed in a ditch just off of the trail. There was hardly any light on us now. When it got to the girl, it contorted its body over the top of her and held her down. She started screaming. Boy 2 got up and hit it with his hiking pole hard. It jolted away up the path behind us, making a crying noise, almost like it was mocking the girl. It was playing with us. We picked ourselves up and ran as fast as we could back down the path and across the reservation to my place. We told my mom what happened, and she told me and my friends the legend of the skinwalkers. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up to a crying sound outside that would stop just as my ears adjusted to being awake. I don't want to look outside my curtains. I never want to see its face again. The girl said when it was on her, it was hissing in her ear, and it was whispering things to her that she didn't understand. I still get nightmares. Fifth story. The creature in the woods came back, with tragic results. Many months had passed since I was nearly pulverized by the creature in the woods. I was with my buddy Joe when it happened up in northern Ontario. We'd gotten ourselves lost in the dark of the forest, where monsters are known to prowl in the shadows of towering trees. Up here, monsters exist. Ultimately, it was Patrick who saved us. Patrick had been tracking the thing for weeks prior to saving our hides. According to him, the creature is a result of top-secret government experiments dating back to the 1940s. He claims there are others, but none as dangerous as DOGMAN. We searched high and low for the creature in the woods, but to no avail. By the end of March, our band of DOGMAN hunters grew weary. Surely, the beast was dead. The northerly town of Kapuskasing enjoyed a brief period of normality. No more missing kittens. No more mutilated animal carcasses discarded in people's yards or left on the side of the road for the crows to pick apart. Life moved on. People forgot. Unfortunately, we did too. We let our guard down, and it cost us big time. We become fast friends. Hanging out at Patrick's cabin by the lake was a nice pastime on long weekends. Last weekend was no different. Except, of course, it was different. It was a complete catastrophe. "Go grab us some firewood," Patrick said in his thick French accent. Him and Joe were huddled by the campfire, warming their hands over the flickering flames, drinking beer. The evening was cool and breezy. The grass was wet from the previous night's rainfall. The moon hung like a bowling ball, big and round and full of holes. I forced myself off the patio chair and went in search of firewood. Behind the cabin, nearing the rim of the forest, I caught whiff of something foul, a mixture of grease and wet fur. I gagged. Figuring it was a bear, I picked up the pace. The last thing I wanted was to be bear food. Something shot through the dense woodland, a stone's throw from where I was standing, making my hair stand on end. Then it released a desperate howl. The sound filled me with dread. That's no bear. I scanned the vicinity, cursing myself for not bringing a flashlight. All I could see was lake and forest. The feeling that I was being watched was impossible to ignore. Twigs snapped. I spun around like a superhero. Two laser-red eyes were peering at me through the thick of the brush. "Dogman." I scampered back to camp, like a scared puppy. Patrick was yammering on and on about his precious Habs and why they'll do better next year. He was furious. Never mess with a French Canadian when it comes to hockey, especially when you're dealing with the Montreal Canadiens. "Guys," I said, dropping the wood in front of the fire. Patrick ignored me. I tried my luck with Joe. "Joe," I cried, "something's out there." That caught their attention. In this part of the world, when someone utters that phrase, you'd better take notice. Joe and Patrick sat upright. Before I could get another word in, the creature in the woods howled. The sound ricocheted off the frigid lake like a fresh breeze. It sounded close. "Oh crap," Patrick slurred, his face twisted in torment. This is man who prides himself on being prepared, which none of us were at that moment. "Joe," he snapped, "go grab the guns." Joe stood up abruptly. The lawn chair stuck to his backside, like something out of a Winnie the Pooh movie. He stumbled and fell face first onto the soggy ground. Not his shining moment. Patrick cursed in French. "Fine, I'll do it myself," he said, and hurried towards his heavily armed microbus. Something growled, deep and guttural. Joe shot me a look that said, "Let's go," and we raced to the safety of the cabin, slamming the door behind us. "Patrick, better hurry," Joe said, gasping for air. His face looked like milk. We scooted to the window, which overlooked the driveway. Patrick was fumbling for his keys, trying to unlock the hatch. He dropped the keys. One could imagine the cocktail of cuss words coming from his mouth at that moment. Nobody swears like the French. Our beating hearts sounded like bombs in the otherwise dead silent cabin. Our eyes were glued to Patrick, who'd retrieved his precious car keys. As Patrick was opening the trunk, something lunged in front of the cabin window. "Ah!" we screamed in unison. "Dogman." The beast was hideous. It scowled at us through the frosted glass, exposing an artillery of jagged, white teeth. Its muzzle drenched in drool. It stood on its muscular hind legs, flexing its jangly claws inches from our faces. I gasped. This was the Dogman that nearly tore me to shreds a few months earlier. The door handle turned as the creature clawed at the cabin door, trying to get inside. The beast roared, sending shivers down my spine. Then it crashed into the door. Once again, my life flashed before my eyes. The creature in the woods had come back. Now, what was going to finish me off? Shots rang out, sounding like a million volts of thunder. Joe and I dropped to the floor and ate dust. Outside, Patrick was whooping and hollering and cussing in French. Joe stood up and peeked outside. The look he gave me wasn't encouraging. More shots were fired. I shot to my feet like a firecracker. Patrick's infamous Chuck Norris grin was plastered across his freckled face. In his hands was a semi-automatic rifle. The dog-like creature jumped on top of the microbus, screaming in protest. Before Patrick could take aim, the beast flew off the van and tackled him to the ground. "No!" I cried out. Terror enveloped me. My hands were shaking, my legs were butter. Joe grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun off the wall. He cocked it. Then, using the butt of the weapon, he smashed through the window and pointed the weapon. "Damn it," he said. "I can't get a line on the thing." Meanwhile, Patrick was being mauled. The menacing mutt had him pinned to the ground and was tearing him to shreds. The creature's face was a bloodied mess. Its claws clenched around Patrick's neck, squeezing the life out of him. Patrick, reaching desperately for his weapon, was covered head to toe in scratches. Fury found me. If this creature thinks it can feast on my friend, it's got another thing coming. I found a Smith & Wesson lying on top Patrick's dresser. It would have to do. I opened the cabin door, took aim, and fired. Bam! The creature collapsed headfirst on top of Patrick, who quickly freed himself. He found his semi-automatic and went berserk. Joe and I stood transfixed as a bouquet of bullets pulverized the dogman. Blood and guts and entrails exploded from its chest, like spaghetti hitting a fan, covering the beast head to toe in gore. The creature shrieked. Its crimson teeth glistened under the pale moonlight. It took a tentative step back, wiped the blood from its muzzle, then attacked. With one quick swipe, the beast tore off Patrick's left arm. "Pat!" Joe proclaimed. Joe rushed outside and shot the creature in the back. Patrick fell from its grip like a sack of stones. The beast was caked in red. It looked at Joe and charged. Joe flew into the cabin head first, making it just in the nick of time. The cabin door groaned as the beast slammed into it. The door was on its last legs. Patrick was crying for help. "We gotta save him," I said, in between bouts of hysteria. Joe was trembling. He'd nearly been dogman food. I know the feeling. The animal was clawing at the door, grunting. "The freezer," I said. "Of course," Joe said, reading my mind. "Dogs like food, especially meat, something this cabin has plenty of." I found a pack of frozen moose steaks from the freezer. The creature was crouched over Patrick, ready to finish him off. I whistled, stealing its attention, then tossed the meat out the door. The beast started sniffing the offering. Its tongue was dripping with blood. Patrick's blood. The dogman raised its ugly head. Then it attacked the steaks like a hungry bear. Meanwhile, Patrick's intestines spilled across his blood-stained sweater as his lifeless body lay on sodden soil next to an arm that moments ago belonged to him. The monster was gnawing away on the frozen flesh, grunting and groaning. The sound was sickening. Joe cocked and fired. The shot went wide. "Damn it," he said, shaking his head in dismay. The dog creature dropped the meat and looked me with venom. I shot the thing square between its eyes. Kablum! Blood exploded from the beast's head in every direction. I fired again, hitting it in the leg. By now I was fuming. Vengeance was mine. The creature dropped to its knees. Fresh blood ran down its face. My eyes darted towards Patrick, who was barely hanging on by a thread. Miraculously, he'd managed to prop himself up against the back of the van. He was panting. Blood was pouring out of him like wet paint. The creature cried out, sending a wave of chills down my spine. Something called back. Then another. There were others. "There must be more of them," I said, barely recognizing the sound of my voice. The howling continued. A pack of dogmans filled the endless night with song. Joe came up behind me. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. "On 3, he whispered. Joe counted. On 3, the door swung open. Joe and I jumped outside, shooting the beast again and again, its body obliterated by the onslaught of ammunition. The dogman floundered, but somehow held its ground. Finally, as our attack persisted, the creature retreated back into the thick of the forest, leaving a trail of blood and matted fur behind. Suddenly, the world went still. Patrick whimpered. "He needs a doctor," I said. "Fast." Joe called 911 while I stood next to Patrick, holding his one and only hand. It was iceberg cold. He was leaking a tremendous amount of blood. His eyes were barely open, his breathing shallow. Joe arrived with first aid. We tended to Patrick the best we could, but his prospects weren't good. This far north, ambulances are not waiting around the corner. They don't come on a whim. It took an hour before the helicopter arrived. Patrick was flown to the nearest hospital. The cops showed up soon thereafter with a boatload of questions. Apparently, they were acutely aware of this dogman creature and have been for quite some time. This didn't make me feel better. The thing was still lurking in the forest, not far from where we were standing. Joe and I sat around the fire until the sun came up. There was no sleep for us that night. We tried to convince ourselves that Patrick would be fine. He's the toughest guy we knew. If anyone could survive an assault of that magnitude, it's him. Meanwhile, we kept a close eye on the edge of the forest, waiting for the creature from the woods to return. Patrick called the following day. Sadly, the doctors couldn't save his arm, but they did save his life. He seemed in good spirits, but was heavily sedated and unable to talk for long. The weight of the world fell from our shoulders. I wouldn't worry too much about Patrick. Knowing him, he's plotting his revenge as I type this. I certainly wouldn't put it past him. Word travels fast in the north. The town of Kapuskasing was once again placed on high alert. People prepared. There are creatures in the woods. Creatures that rip limbs from your body. Creatures that sink their teeth into your flesh and claw your throat. And not just one. There are others that said, there's only one monster on my mind as I finish typing this story. The creature who came back from the forest, DOGMAN. 6th story. Enjoy your trip to the forest. My name is Tom Owens. I am a retired worker for the Department of Agriculture, and I'm here to share with you a story that has been the source of much anxiety, many questions, and more sleepless nights than I would care to think about. This is but one of the strange things that happened to me during my time working as a timber and silviculture tech for the Forestry Service in Indiana. For a long time, I've held my silence about what happened in fear of what may become of me if I decide to tell this story. I was forced to sign paperwork stating I would forever keep it a secret. Well, today, that silence will be broken. Having worked for the Forestry Service for almost 22 years, it's easy to say that a person need quickly learn to respect the forest and its inhabitants, animal or otherwise. A lot of the work involved would probably seem like pretty mundane things, such as marking out trees for timber and preparing locations for seeding and tree planting. A lot of my time was spent alone or in small groups. Bizarre things happened to me in both those situations, and I can assure that the feeling of safety in numbers really did not apply in my experience. I cannot recall the exact date when this story takes place, but I know it was early fall of 1988, and I had recently just celebrated my 38th birthday and had been living in Nashville for a couple of years by then. I had been teamed up with Henry Waite and new boy Stanley Holt to scope out timber to be harvested for firewood in the Brown County State Park, just off the Salt Creek Trail. Henry, a towering frame of a man who, at one time at least, would have looked like he could fell a tree with a single blow of an axe if he so wanted to, had been doing this work almost his entire life. He was maybe 3 or 4 years off retirement at this point. He had deep furrowed lines crossing about his face and forehead which suggested a more than serious look about him, and had a deep gravelly voice that time had clearly softened. I had worked with him on a number of occasions in the 22 years I had under my belt with the service, and in honesty, I didn't mind the old-timer. I mean, he wasn't always the perfect coworker. He could be awkward when it came to making decisions, and there were times when I would be sweating my ass off moving equipment about, only to find the guy sleeping in the cab of our truck. But I had to accept the poor bastard was nearly 70 years old and had clearly done his share of manual labor in his time. I certainly had a lot more time for him than the others, it seemed. Henry used to have some real interesting stories. He used to tell others about stuff he'd heard out in the forest and stuff he claimed to have seen too. Oftentimes, he was alone when these occurrences took place, and the other workers never really paid him much attention and generally would pass his stories as mere scaremongering, verging on the ramblings of a senile old man. As for myself, I took his tales with a pinch of salt. Heaven knows you had to, otherwise you'd likely find yourself out alone one day and hear something in the distance and end up totally shitting yourself and running back to your truck. Other than this, though, he never was one to talk all that much beyond small talk and chit-chat. But when he was recalling one of his stories, he would come alive, so to speak, and really put a great show on. He was one hell of a storyteller, that's for sure. I can picture him now, with his tufty gray hair wafting about in time to his movement, and the large lump of fur resting upon his top lip, obscuring a rather large portion of his weathered old face, twisting and protruding as he formed his words enthusiastically. "There's no telling what you might run into out there, son," he would often exclaim in his gruff, yet somehow gentle voice. But anyway, I'm here to share my own story, and I hope I can portray it as well as Henry often did. I remember the rays of the low-set afternoon sun were still strong for that particular time of year, casting a warm glow over the still green forest surrounding us. We had just finished packing our kit bags with the markers and measuring equipment we would need, and was about to set off to the designated area on our charts to begin tagging trees ready for harvest. This was our last job for the day, and conversation was thin as Stan, the new guy, didn't seem like a conversationalist of any kind, and the three of us settled into that semi-comfortable silence that strangers often find themselves in when waiting for a bus or queuing up at the checkouts in the store. He struck me as the sort of person who was simply here to do his job, then go home. He had no interest in it other than the financial reward he would receive at the end of each week of work. Fine by me, I thought as we quietly made our way along the well-worn path. The route we were taking was one often used by hikers to reach the nearby camping area and a rather nice viewing point. A few minutes passed before anyone broke the silence, and it was Henry that did so. Looks like we need to follow the trail as far as the fork, then hang a turn south into the trees, he stated. Then probably another 20 minutes heading slightly east, and we should spot the first few that are ready for the chop. I said, "You've been out this way before then, I take it?" Henry paused a beat before answering. "Yep, remember this trail well. Been a few years, mind you." And he gave me a quick glance over his shoulder. I noticed that when I had asked the question, he had straightened his back ever so slightly as he answered. "Something the matter, Henry?" I asked. "Not the location of one of your famous ghost stories, is it?" I said jokingly, trying to lighten the atmosphere. Stan gave me a funny look that clearly said he didn't know what I was on about. Henry just scratched at his thinning hair. "Ain't no ghosts in my story, son." He didn't say anything more, just maintained the same pace, trudging ahead along the trail. "What stories you talking about?" Stan was looking at me. A look of concern had crossed his face. He was only 20 or 21. His slight build looked out of place in his uniform, and the kit bag looked like it might pull him down to the ground at any moment. "Oh, nothing really. Henry likes to tell stories about himself and scary shit that's happened to him out here. He's quite the storyteller. Wouldn't you say, Henry?" I said, glancing past Stan to where he was making his steady progress. He didn't respond. "Scary stories? How like what?" Stan said. "Not ghosts. Witches and werewolves. Ain't that right, Henry?" I said, trying again to get a reaction out of him. But still he remained silent, except this time I saw his shoulders rise and drop in a theatrical sigh. I continued, "Rumor has it the poor ended up marrying one." I said jokingly, expecting to have to dodge a right hook from Henry, but still there was no noticeable reaction. "I bet there's some really weird things out here. Not like people spend much time out wandering about the forest, is it?" Stan said, adding his thoughts on the matter. Finally he spoke. "Not true, son. There's plenty of things out here, not just deer and cougars, though. But sure, there's less people relying on the land nowadays compared to when I was your age, and that's for the best, I can assure you. So what about hikers and such? Should they worry about these things?" asked Stan. "He's been out here all of an hour, and already he's lapping it all up," I thought. I wasn't that gullible when I was so young. "Things is right, boy. I don't rightly know what someone should call them," Henry said. "Sometimes I wonder if they're even really of this world." "Okay, let's not scare the shit out of the poor guy before he's even done any work, Henry. We've got a lot to get on with this afternoon, and we need all the help we can get if we want a chance of getting home in time to see the sun set." I interjected. Henry chimed back with, "All I'm saying is, it's best to keep an eye out for weird shit out here. We're alone and a good few miles from, well, anybody. If you think ABO, that's enough, man." I cut him short. "Can we just get on with finding these trees and doing our jobs?" My temper was fraying. Henry wasn't normally like this. Usually he just wanted the same as me. Do a good job, then get on with making it back to the truck safely before it gets dark. I too had heard strange noises when working out alone, but your mind plays tricks on you when there's no company. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck out here in the pitch black with a rookie and Mr. Stephen King himself, lugging all this shit about with us. Henry just grunted something at me and carried on walking. Stan was eyeing me with a look of worry about him, but didn't press the matter any further, much to my relief. It wasn't much longer before we reached the fork in the trail that Henry had mentioned earlier. He set down his bag and took a seat on a fallen tree, whilst I took out the chart and made note of our destination from where we were. "Looks like we cut through in this direction," I pointed out. "Then it should be only another 20 minutes further on." "Is it okay if I go take a leak?" asked Stan. "I shouldn't have finished my flask of coffee on the drive over here." "Does a bear shit in the woods?" replied Henry. Stan seemed a little embarrassed, but said no more and cut off the path through the tree line for a little privacy. The trees were a lot denser in the direction we were headed. Not much sunlight made its way through the thick canopy provided by the trees and foliage. There was a slight chill in the air now, it seemed, and a gentle breeze had picked up along with what was the beginning of the even chorus of bird songs. "So, what do you make of him?" I took the opportunity to ask Henry. "Who? What do you mean, who?" "Stanley. The new guy. Been with us the past couple hours on his first day. Or is your memory going in your old age?" "My memory is just fine, actually. I was just thinking about something else is all." "Something else?" Henry didn't reply. "Care to elaborate?" I asked after a moment. "Just the last time I was up here, not one of my best days at work from what I remember. Some really weird shit started happening." "Oh God, can you drop the weird shit thing already?" I replied tensely. For the first time that afternoon, I felt a strange sense that something was not quite right. Like the sensation we were being observed or something. "Christ, have you let him get to you too?" I thought to myself. I shook the feeling off, and a moment or two later Stan returned, and we made our way east as planned, though this time I was paying a lot more attention to our surroundings. The area we were in occasionally received reports of large carnivores, such as mountain lions, gray wolves, and black bears. It sometimes paid to keep a casual idea of your surroundings. I didn't fancy unknowingly being stalked by a mountain lion or such. About halfway to the marked area on the map, I began feeling my legs start to protest at carrying the large weight on my back. I wasn't unfit by a long run, far from it in fact, but as we were no longer on the marked path, it was surprising how much more energy was required to make progress through the undergrowth. Where we were headed was only just over a half-mile from the trail, as the crow flies, but the going was much tougher and more time-consuming. I began to wonder how long Henry would go before he too started to slow, but to my surprise he carried on without a problem. Stan, on the other hand, was clearly not as used to the hard trek with the extra weight. Dark sweat patches had formed around his armpits, and I noticed him occasionally wiping the sweat from his brow. Suddenly, in the distance, somewhere came the sound of what I could only say was a chainsaw. Well, close to the sound of one anyway. It had an unusual buzz to it that undeniably sounded a lot closer than the noise of the chainsaw itself. All three of us stopped to listen. None of us seemed to be able to tell which way it was coming from. Didn't realize we were near a logging site out this way. I thought out loud. "We're not. Closest one is about 40 miles from here," countered Henry. "Could just be someone gathering some firewood," I said. Weirdly, the noises I normally associated with the forest had stopped. The breeze had died too. Sweat beaded on the back of my neck and slowly made a cold trail down right to where my belt was. I shivered slightly in response. I scanned our surroundings looking for the source of the noise, but the trees created a weird acoustic and I found it impossible to tell. "Strange," Henry said. "It sounds wrong." "What do you mean?" I asked. "It sounds like it's on a loop, just the same buzzing noise on repeat." He was right. I hadn't noticed it at first, but it was clear now. There was no deviation in the tone of the chainsaw noise, not like when you cut wood, and the tone and pitch changes as the engine works more and less to cut through the trunk of a tree. Something wasn't right about it, and it just made me want to be as far away as possible from it. Whatever it was giving me chills down my spine. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Without warning, we were plunged into complete silence. No leaves rustling in the wind. That breeze was gone too. But most strange of all, not a single bird was singing. Not a single note. My unease grew even more, to a point where I actually felt like there was a lump in my throat, I couldn't swallow. We should just keep M.O. Click. The sound came before I could finish my sentence. I glanced over to where the noise had come from, and I saw Henry aiming a .38 revolver high above his head. What the foo? Boom. He fired it. The surrounding area echoed the sound across the whole place, and the forest itself seemed to come alive as hundreds of birds flocked from the treetops and made a quick getaway from the loud noise. In the distance, I noticed a few deer dart from cover and disappear into the thick vegetation of the forest. You crazy son of a bitch. Why the hell do you have that out here? I asked angrily. You know we could lose our jobs if they find out you carry one of those in a company vehicle. Calm down, son. It's just a bit of protection. This is bear country, don't forget, said Henry crossly. Besides, nobody will find out as long nobody says anything. He had Stan and myself as he said this. Christ. Or I just put the thing away before you blow someone's head off waving that about. Can we just get on and get home already? I said, throwing my arms up into the air and pushing past them both in the direction of the trees to the east. The chainsaw noise had disappeared too. Whoever it was were now probably scared someone lunatic was out here with a gun in the middle of nowhere. Henry scowled at me as I passed him, but soon matched my pace and was walking along beside me. Stan was following on behind. He didn't seem the least bit worried about what just happened. Guy's an idiot, this one. How can he not give a shit about him randomly firing off shots when he's just met the man? I wondered. You can thank me later, Henry said to me under his breath. What for? Bringing a gun with you to work so we can all get fired? No. For probably saving your ass back there, he said. From what? You really are crazy, aren't you? They've been following us for a while now. Goosebumps covered all over my skin, and I suddenly went cold. What are you on about, Henry? Don't talk about this is not funny, man. Look, I'm not going to say anything, so just drop the act, will ya? I said, my mind going back to the chainsaw noise, wondering if he wasn't just trying to scare the living shit out of me. Because if he was, it was damned well working. Them things, you might not have seen them, but I did. See, I know what I'm looking for. I've seen him before. The last time I was out these ways, like I said earlier. What things, Henry? I thought those were just stories you made up to scare people. Holy shit, it was getting me worried enough as it is. I don't want to hear any more of it. I said, look, all I know is that they mean bad trouble. They ain't natural, whatever they are. People go missing out here regularly, and nobody seems to give a damn shit about it. Whole groups of people have gone out hiking and never return. Campsites are found undisturbed, but the owner just outright disappears. Then, next you hear about them is a random piece of their clothing turns up out of the blue, usually a shoe or something. No blood on it or scratches or anything. Normally within a few days of them disappearing, but whatever turns up is usually far away from where they went missing. Too far for them to have got there themselves in the time that they are gone. We're talking miles away. Something strange happens in this forest, so keep your eyes peeled, son. It might just mean the difference between going home tonight and not. This was the most I'd ever heard Henry say when not recalling one of his many stories. Something about the way he was looking at me and the way he said it told me he was being serious. So why aren't telling Stan the same thing? If it's that dangerous here, I countered, because I don't trust him as far as I can piss. Something's different about him compared to before. He won't look me in the eye. Also, in case you haven't noticed, he hasn't said a damned word since we left the trail back there. He was right. Stan had not said a word since he left us and came back. He didn't even flinch when Henry had fired the gun a minute ago and he was stood right next to him. It should have nearly deafened him. I thought about what he was telling me and tried to process it all. The sun was getting lower and the light level in the forest suddenly seemed a lot darker. All right, let's just say you're right. We're in the shit and being followed by whatever it is, and something's not up with Stan. I glanced over my shoulder to make sure he couldn't hear us. Stan was ambling along behind us and staring hard straight back at me. Why, go right back there, Stan. I stumbled over the words. Oozing suspicion. He just smiled back and carried on walking, then looked out to his right into the trees. Shit, what was up with his eyes? They looked as though they were glistening, as if he was going to cry. but his posture, his body language was nothing but confidence. Yet at the same time, the way he was walking seemed off, slightly rigid or something. Henry drew my attention away as he started speaking again. If I'm right, which I'm almost certain I am, we need to make it back to the truck and out of these trees. And fast. What if we don't make it back to the truck? I asked fearfully. Then said Henry point blank. By now I was genuinely scared. For the first time in my life, I was fearing for my life. And I didn't even know what I was scared of. We need to turn back. We're only an hour's hike from the truck, and we should have enough daylight left to make it in time. But we need to leave. Now, said Henry. And what about Stan? You think there's something wrong about him? I asked Henry. I think he's one of them, he said. Back when we're at the fork, and he came back from having a piss, didn't you notice how quiet everything was? Like complete silence. Not quiet, but damned silent. Well, but it's Stan. Are you sure you don't need GLA? They can change into other things. Came Henry's reply. My mind was racing, trying to take it all in. There was so much that didn't make sense. It should all just belong in a horror movie, but now, apparently it was real. It takes some time to perfect it, and usually it's not perfect. They even sound exactly the same as the person they're copying. I'm pretty sure that Chainsaw Noise back there was one of them. That's why it was sounding like a loop. Almost as he finished speaking, the chainsaw noise started up again, as if on cue. This time, though, it was a lot closer, and I was certain I saw movement behind Henry. We both froze. Henry followed my gaze. What I saw chilled me to the core. In the middle distance was the silhouette of what sort of resembled a person sitting on their haunches. But this person would have easily been at least 8 foot tall if they were standing. It took a step closer and must have covered a good 10 meters in one stride. Its skin caught a rare ray of sunlight filtering through the trees. Its skin was pale and sickly looking and appeared to be painfully drawn tight over the skeletal frame of its body, almost to the point of splitting open. I felt my blood run cold, but I couldn't move. I was frozen to the spot with fear. The same seemed to apply to Henry beside me. It cocked its head at us both like a dog sometimes does. I realized its lopsided mouth was open, and just as it closed it, the chainsaw noise stopped abruptly, only to start again when it opened its mouth for a second time. Inside were luminous, serrated teeth. Huge teeth, like some dramatic makeup prop. Henry stole a quick glance behind us. He whispered, "Stan is gone." What the hell?" I stammered. But I couldn't tear my gaze away from this thing. It was like it was staring straight into my very being. Suddenly it closed and opened its mouth again. This time, instead of the chainsaw, it emitted a loud and clear click. Henry looked down at the revolver in his waistband. "Holy shit, it's mimicking the noises we've been making," he said. Almost instantly, the creature lurched forward towards us at an incredible speed, but on all fours, bounding over a fallen tree, half its own height like it was nothing. "Run!" I bellowed. I took off without looking back to check if Henry or the creature was following. I could hear branches breaking behind me, which I'm sure must have been him, as off to my side, I could hear the same, only a lot louder, as if whole trees were being snapped in half. I ran for my dear life, as fast as my legs would carry me. I dropped the heavy bag that was weighing me down, expensive gear crashing to the floor. And I don't care how much it's worth, I thought. The chainsaw noise was underway again, getting nearer and faster as I broke back onto the Salt Creek Trail. My feet pounded the dirt beneath me as I pleaded with my legs to move faster. I suddenly was hit by what I could only describe as a wall of stench. The smell of rotting flesh was unmistakable, making me retch bile into my own mouth and burning my throat at the same time. I looked off to my side, and to my horror the beast was getting closer, bounding through the trees just a few meters off. It locked eyes with me, and I nearly stumbled. The thing was smiling at me, showing off row after row of unimaginably jagged, sharp teeth. It opened its mouth and let off an animalistic screech that was high-pitched and shrill, but reverberated around inside my body at the same time. I could hear Henry, behind me, somehow keeping pace somehow. He was keeping up even though he was in his 60s, and we must have covered most of a mile by now. My own lungs were on fire, and I could feel the burning in my legs start to become too much to push through. I was running on pure adrenaline and fear. I rounded the last corner before the small clearing, where we had parked the truck earlier. Just a bit further, and I was free of this nightmare. As I crested the small hill leading into the car park, my heart sank. There was no truck. There wasn't even a car park, just another seemingly endless trail. My mind worked overtime trying to figure out if I had made a wrong turn. I was sure I hadn't. There was only one trail anywhere near here, and it was the only one in and out of the forest for miles around. I could hear the creature gaining on me. I dared not look into the trees again to see how close it was. My thoughts changed instantly as I heard the unmistakable noise of someone stumbling behind me. A Fushida. Henry had fallen. I skidded a halt and swung around to grab him. "No, keep going," he yelled at me. I hesitated for a split second. No, I can't leave him, I thought. But it was all the time the thing needed. Before I could take one step in Henry's direction, it was upon him. It pinned him face down into the dirt as it looked up at me. Its face was different. It looked like some kind of wolf, but with the torso of a man. What would have been its rear legs were also that of a wolf. Only this thing was standing up now, and was at least 7 or 8 foot tall. All I could smell was rotting flesh, so strong it was making me want to puke again. My mind tried to make sense of it all. Had it changed shape again? I asked myself. The creature opened its wide mouth and let off a horrific screech before leaping away with Henry in its clutches into the tree line. As I stood there dumbfounded, I heard a wet squelching and cracking sound accompanied by a terrible guttural scream. He was dead. Henry was dead. Before I could even process that he was gone, taken by some damn creature, I had the chainsaw off to my side again. Tree branches started thumping and cracking as something made its way to where I was. And fast. There must have been more than one, I realized. I took off again, not even time to think about what Savage and Henry must have met. Hell, I didn't even want to try to imagine it. As fast as my legs would carry me, I headed further along the trail that should have taken me back to the truck and to safety. Up ahead, there was a turn in the track. Could I have got it wrong? Was the car parked further than I had originally thought? All around me, the forest was alive with screeching and branches snapping and the loud clicks of Henry's revolver cocking. It was getting louder the closer I got to the bend up ahead. As I suddenly was on top of the corner, the noises reached fever pitch. I was sure I was done for. I rounded the bend, only to be confronted with the sudden end of the trail and a wall of dense, thick trees. I was certain that these were going to be the last moments of my life, torn to shreds by something nobody even knew existed. I dove into the trees, not wanting to give up yet, somehow believing I could escape. But in reality, the trees were where they were most at home, leaping about like it was nothing while I blindly tripped and stumbled my way onwards. Without warning, the ground beneath my feet dropped away, and before I knew it, I was falling down and down, smashing into trees and branches on the way. I looked down at where I would land, just in time to see a massive bough from a tree coming straight for my face. I hit it full force and saw stars replace my vision. I try not to think of the terrible things about to happen to me after those things caught up with me. Then everything simply went black. All I was aware of was a high-pitched whining noise coming and going. I'm not sure how much time passed. The first things I could sense was movement all around me. Then I could hear shouting. Yes, shouting. That meant people. Something opened my eye, and a blinding bright light poured and stinging my corneas. Then the same to the other. I opened them both and was staring face to face with a woman I had never seen before. "He's awake," she exclaimed. My head was pounding, and there was a tingling sensation down my left side. Suddenly, I was aware of a terrible throbbing in my forehead. I let out a pathetic groan in response to the pain. "Morphine," said the woman loudly. Her booming words rattled my brain. "It's okay, so we're going to give you something for the pain. Just try to relax and not move." She was holding my head firmly in place. My eyes scanned over behind her, and I saw a male paramedic coming over with a syringe. He just fell out of the tree leaned straight in front of my rig. A large man said. He was wearing denim and a leather jacket. He looked to be speaking to a police officer who was busy taking notes. I must have blacked out again because I next woke up in hospital as a nurse was reading my vitals. Hello, sir. Don't worry, you are safe now. That was some nasty accident you had back there. You were lucky that 18-wheeler didn't run you over. I opened my mouth, tried and speak, but no matter how hard I tried, no words would come out. It turned out I had suffered mild brain damage as a result of my fall. It took me nearly 3 years to be able to speak properly again. Endless therapy sessions and the constant pain of not being able to tell anyone about what had really happened in that forest. Henry and Stan, to this day, are still listed as missing people. Police interviewed me, but all I could say was that I couldn't remember anything that happened that day. I was considered a suspect for a very long time, but they had no evidence of any foul play. I think eventually they got bored and genuinely started to believe I had hit my head hard enough to not remember any of it. I was also visited in hospital by a representative of my employer. I was basically scared into signing a non-disclosure form about anything that might have happened to me whilst in the forest. I wish they were true. The truck driver visited me also in my time in hospital. He was a nice man, if a bit rough around the edges. Nick Current is his name, and I'm still friends with him today, nearly 20 years later. The thing is, though, something he told me doesn't quite sit right. The location where I nearly landed directly under his wheels was just outside of Bloomington on the I-46 road, over 10 miles away from where we were working that day. I still don't know what those things were in the woods. I try not to think about it mostly. It just gives me nightmares. I'm just glad I've gotten it off my chest, so to speak. Maybe tonight I will sleep a little better finally. I just hope nobody else has to go through the same things that I did almost 30 years ago. 7th story. The Dogman of Vegreville. I was 6 years old when I saw The Dogman of Vegreville, and I will never, ever forget it. It was on a cool Thursday night in May of 1995. Mom had told me to go to bed, but I wasn't tired yet. I'd snuck my Game Boy under the covers and was playing Mario with the volume off, thinking that I was oh so clever. Mom was probably already in bed and Dad was working late, so he wouldn't be in to check on me anytime soon. I knew I could play my heart's content, and I intended to do just that. My fingers moved clumsily over the buttons as I sent Mario to his death over and over again. I wasn't very good at the game, but it didn't matter. I loved it anyway. I didn't look up from the screen until I heard the distant pop of what sounded like fireworks. I remember that I'd peeked out of the covers. There was no flash of light outside my window, and while it was a beautiful night, there wasn't really any occasion to let off fireworks. All the same, I could still hear those frantic pops, one after the other. Bang, 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 bang. I never heard a gun go off before. In movies and on TV, yes, but never in real life. I never thought it would sound so much like fireworks. I set my Game Boy down to go and look out the window, half hoping to catch a glimpse of the show I thought was out there. As I looked out into the darkness, though, I saw nothing. Those fireworks had been very close by. I knew that much, but I couldn't see anyone who could have set them off. My house was in a small suburb that backed onto the woods, and my window faced the next-door neighbor's yard. I could see the lights on in their house, but nothing else. No one was in the yard. I noticed that the door to the back porch was open. No, not open. Shattered. Something had forced its way in, although I didn't quite connect the dots at the time. Then I heard a scream. The terrified cry of a frightened woman that was cut off abruptly. That too was close by, and I could tell exactly where that was coming from. It had come from the neighbor's house. I stared at the house, trying to understand just what was going on. There were no other sounds, no other screams, just a pregnant silence. Outside my bedroom, I could hear my mom moving around. She must have heard the same things I had, and I could hear as she raced downstairs to investigate the commotion for herself. She hadn't even made it to the front door when I saw something emerge from the back of the next-door neighbor's house. It loped through the broken porch door, a scrawny, hairy thing that looked like no animal I'd ever seen before. I could see its pointed ears twitching on its head and its pointed wolfish snout. Its limbs seemed too long. It seemed to limp as if it was in pain, no doubt from the gunshot wounds it had suffered. Its head turned to look at me, and I saw two golden eyes shining in the darkness. They looked upwards and into my window, where I stared back at it. Whatever that creature was, it looked at me. It saw me. For a moment, our eyes remained locked. Time felt as if it stood still. Even from a distance, I know I saw something in its stare or in its face. But at the time, I couldn't put my finger on it. It was the creature that broke eye contact. It shook its head and shuffled away. Without ceremony, it took off into the woods. The darkness amongst the trees quickly swallowed a whole, and I lost sight of it. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. What happened next is a blur. I don't have any other clear memories from that night, nor do I remember much about what followed. I'm sure my mom did what she could to shelter me from it. I still found out the details anyways, because that's what happens in small towns. People talk, and kids listen. While I may not remember what happened after my mom discovered the corpses of Nicholas and Ashley Burr, it was the talk of the town at the time, and every now and then, some people still whisper about it. Vegreville, British Columbia is a small town with a population that barely tops 3,000 people. Gruesome murders aren't exactly common here, and so when one happens, you'd better believe that people are going to remember it. According to the rumors, some sort of animal broke into the Burr household that night. Most people claim it was a bear, but I've heard some people insist it was a puma. Either way, it woke up Nicholas Burr, and he took down his hunting rifle to kill it. He found it in his kitchen and shot about 6 times before it attacked him, and it damn near ripped him in half. Ashley Burr was found upstairs. The creature had gone after her next and ripped her pretty little head clean off her shoulders and crushed it to a pulp. It was shortly afterwards that it ran off. Supposedly the commotion from concerned neighbors investigating the gunshot and Ashley's final scream spooked it, and it retreated off into the woods. Nobody actually got a good look at it. Nobody but me. Over time, I've taken to calling the creature the DOGMAN of Vegreville. Of course, nobody else in town ever actually believed I really saw what I saw. They all took my words as proof that it was a bear, and as I grew up, I learned that it was best not to talk about it. It's easy to forgive a child for claiming he saw something unnatural, but as one ages, that becomes a much less forgivable offense. I never once believed that I'd actually seen a bear that night, though. As I said before, I remember very clearly what I saw. I've seen it in my nightmares for 25 years now, and it sure as hell wasn't a bear. But like I said, I keep that to myself. I'm a grown man now, and I've got other concerns to worry about. I've got rent to pay, a job at the local auto shop to keep, and I've got my mom to take care of. A few months after the Burr incident, my dad's car broke down on the side of a highway while he was on his way home from work one night. He must have been trying to flag down a passing car for help, although the poor bastard whose attention he got didn't notice him until after he'd felt the bump of his body beneath his tires. Dad died instantly, and my mom was never quite the same afterwards. Grief leaves scars on a person that never fully heal, and I had to learn to step up as the man of the house pretty damn quickly after that. I don't believe I've mentioned the DOGMAN of Vegreville to my mom in a long while. She's got enough on her plate without hearing about my little side project. As age creeps up on her, her health has begun to fail even more. I haven't felt comfortable leaving her by herself. Sickness has left her unable to work, so I handle the bills. She does some of the cooking, but that's really just about it. I'd hate to push her too hard, especially when she's in such a frail state. A few months back, she had her second stroke, and it's been a slow recovery process ever since. I do what I can for her, I really do. But no matter how much I want, I can't fix her. I can't take away the things that are eating her away, and bringing up my research into a local cryptid that I tied to what I know to have been a traumatic incident to her wouldn't do her any favors. It's best left off the table with her, but just because I don't discuss it doesn't mean I haven't put the work in. As I've said, I know what I saw that night, and I've been aiming to prove it for some time now. Throughout the years, I researched other attacks in the area. Vegreville only had the one, but I've found reports of similar incidents in the surrounding towns. There were a few of them in the late 80s and early 90s. The attacks all played out similarly enough. Some unknown animal, suspected to be a bear or puma, forced entry into a house and butchered the occupants. Tragic as it was, it got chalked up to a simple animal attack, and that was it. You don't often hear of animals forcing entry into houses. Sure, if you look online, you'll find funny videos of bears breaking open cabin doors and poking around looking for food. However, those cabins aren't occupied when it happens. I've seen my fair share of bears. They aren't keen on people and generally avoid them when at all possible. Vegreville is a pretty remote place, but it's still far too heavily populated for most bears to want to get too close. Sometimes you might hear about them rummaging through trash or poking around people's yards. I'm sure there have even been a few instances where curious bears broke into houses looking for food. Attacks are rare, however, and when they do happen, they generally involve cubs. People don't care about that, though. There's an image of the bear as this demon of the forest, a violent monster who loves nothing more than to rip into fresh meat. People assume that just because they have the ability to easily kill a person, then they are inclined to do so. Supposedly, 3 bears were killed in response to the attacks. One in '88, another in '92, and one in '96. The one that died in '96 was a large female grizzly who had attacked a pair of hikers in the next county over. Since the attacks seemed to stop after that, people figured that was the end of it, and I've got to admit, part of me wondered if that really was the case for the longest time. But then the attacks started up again. I saw them on local news stations. The same story as before. Forced entry into a house and the total slaughter of its occupants. I knew it was that same creature. I could feel it in my bones, and I knew this was my one shot at proving what I'd seen all those years ago. I had no intention of wasting it. The most recent attack occurred in a town called Weston, a few kilometers north of Vegreville. I'd heard about it in the paper, and the next day, I figured I might as well head up to investigate. At worst, I'd waste a day in another town. At best, maybe I might find myself one step closer to understanding just what it was I saw that night. What I knew going in was that Elsa and Janelle Harris were sisters. Janelle was blind, and Elsa took care of her. One night, something had attacked Elsa while she was in her backyard. Janelle had heard the attack, along with the neighbors, and had gone to the door to call for her. Instead, she'd attracted the attention of whatever animal had killed her sister, and it had dragged her off into the woods. Police had found most of her body the next day. Most of it. The Harris house was in a quiet neighborhood, just like my own. I could see the forest behind the houses, though. The map said that it wasn't a particularly large stretch of woods. It was little more than a ravine with a small creek that separated the houses from a nearby park. However, it connected with a larger area of the woods. It made for a perfect little place for man and nature to intersect. The house itself was still sectioned off with police tape. I didn't see anyone to stop me from going inside, but I didn't want to push my luck either. Why try it, right? I parked my car across the street and got out. Even if I wasn't going to go inside the house, maybe there were still clues to be found. The houses in that area didn't have fences. Weston was still fairly rural, all things considered. I could get into the backyard easily enough. The vast forest started at the end of the yard and stretched infinitely deep into it. As I walked past the trees, I was quickly swallowed up by the darkness of the canopy. Just what I was expecting to find, I really can't say. I kept my eyes on the dirt in front of me as I circled around to the backyard. Through the trees, I could see the yellow police tape, isolating the crime scene that was formerly the Harris's backyard. I didn't go too deep into the woods. It was better not to wander out too deep, or else I'd probably have trouble finding my way back. The area around me was oddly quiet. I could hear a few distant birds and some trickling water, but not much else. Slowly, I approached the water, a small creek that ran over some smooth rocks. I didn't cross the creek. No need to go that far. But I stayed on the edge of it and looked out at the space around me. If the DOGMAN really was the one responsible for this, it would no doubt be long gone. I suppose that was a good thing. I had no interest in meeting that thing face to face. As I stood by the creek, my eyes shifted downwards. I'd been half hoping to see something. A footprint. A bit of fur. Hell, maybe even some evidence that Janelle Harris had been dragged that way. I suppose that was my lucky day then. It was faint and easy to miss or mistake for something else. What I say was barely evidence, and yet I saw it all the same. The soil around the creek was wet and muddy. One small segment had grooves in it that indicated something had been dragged that way. A few stones were overturned and had been pulled out of the creek. I paused at the sight of them before I noticed what was right beside those drag marks. A paw print. There was only one. It had landed in the right place at the right time and sank deep into the drying mud. It wasn't even a complete paw print. Just a few canine pads that looked only slightly larger than my hand, and yet looking at them gave me pause. I crouched down by the stream, wide-eyed as I studied the indentation in the mud. This was the closest thing I'd gotten to proof since that night 25 years ago, and I immediately took out my phone to grab a picture. "You lost, sir," a voice said from behind me as soon as the shutter snapped, and I looked back. A man stood a few feet away from me. He was older, somewhere in his 50s, and dressed in flannel. "No," I said hastily as I stood up. "Sorry. I was just looking at some tracks." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "You with the police?" he asked. "Not exactly," I replied, "just doing some research. It's something of a hobby. What happened to the Harris girls, it's really tragic. But it reminded me a bit of some attacks that happened about 25 years back. I was just wondering if maybe there was a connection or something." "A connection?" the other man asked before scoffing. "That your car on the street, by the by? The red Corolla?" "Yeah, that's mine," I said. "You must be new in town then. You living in this area?" "Excuse me. I saw your car the other day. It was your car, right?" His brow furrowed. "I don't think so," I said. "I've never been out here before. I'm just here to look into the killings." The man raised an eyebrow. "That's all, huh? My mistake then. You said you found tracks." I nodded before stepping aside to show them to my new companion. He kept his distance from me as he drew nearer and looked down at the indents in the mud. He studied them for a moment before looking back at me. "Well, that's interesting. I don't suppose you heard what the police had to say on what happened here, did you?" "Bear attack, right?" I asked. He nodded. "They did indeed. You mentioned other attacks in this area 20, 30 years back, didn't you?" "I remember those. I suppose this does fit the bill. You ever hear of a man named Tyler Fox?" The name wasn't familiar. "No, sir," I replied. "Well, I was barely even your age when those attacks happened last, so my memory isn't great. If I recall, folks chalked that up to a bear as well. Fox had some other ideas, though. I remember he was working with the police, taking pictures of prints. If I remember, those prints looked a lot like this. If you snapped any pictures, it might be smart to bring them to him. Chances are he might know something." I looked down at the paw prints once more before looking back at the man. "Tyler Fox, you said?" I felt something brimming in my chest. Hope or elation, perhaps. If there was evidence from the attacks 25 years ago, maybe it would tell me more about what had been out there back then. Maybe it would tell me more about what was out there now. Where would I find him exactly? I asked, and I barely hid the excitement in my voice as I did. The neighbor gave me an address about 15 minutes away and a phone number to call. Tyler Fox picked up on the second ring, and when I told him I'd found some footprints, he seemed pretty eager to meet. His chosen meeting place was a small diner out on the edge of town. A little greasy spoon, the likes of which you'd probably find just about anywhere, and either serve the worst food in the world or the best. No in between. Fox was a man who was right on the edge of 60 with frazzled gray hair and serious eyes behind big, studious glasses. He was waiting for me when I arrived, and I could see his impatience in the way he anxiously drummed his fingers. "Mr. Fox?" I asked timidly. His gaze locked onto me, so fast I was sure he was about to attack. "Yes, that would be me," he said hastily. "You're the one who called about the paw prints, right? Out behind the Harris house." "Yes, sir. I found them just this morning." "Well, sit down." "Sit. Let me buy you a drink. I assume you've got the pictures." Right here, sir. I offered him my phone, and he snatched it out of my hand to study the pictures on the screen. He was silent for a few moments, and a waitress happened by to ask us for our drink orders. Fox had a beer. I opted for soda. A man I spoke to, one of the Harris sisters' neighbors, mentioned you'd looked into the attacks a few years back. I said once the waitress was out of earshot. You had some ideas as to what might be causing them? I did, Fox said, his voice distant. He was barely listening to me. After a moment, he set my phone on the table and pushed it back towards me. The cops back then were quick to chalk the attacks up to a bear. Could be that they were right, although I always thought the tracks looked off. Well, those tracks in the picture. I'm no expert, but I don't think those were bear tracks. They could be, he said. The two main theories I've heard floated around are either bears or wolves were responsible for the attacks. Bears have 5 digits on their paws, just like the tracks you showed me, and the size looks just about right. However, if that is a bear, I'll be very surprised. Why is that? I asked. The palm of the tracks. They've got the right amount of digits, but the palm is too wide. Like a man's palm. He raised one hand and curled his fingers inwards a little bit to make a claw. Only much bigger. You say you found this out behind the Harris house, right? You swear it. Yeah, I swear it. I said. Fox huffed. I didn't know if he believed me or not. These look exactly like the tracks I found a few years back. Exactly. Off the top of my head, I'd say this was the same animal. As for what exactly that animal is, well, hell if I know. I take it you're looking into all this if you were poking around the Harris house. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. That's right. Well, good luck to you. I dug through this shit all those years ago. I never figured out what was really behind those attacks. If you're digging into this, I can send you some of my old photographs and whatnot. I'm a little too old to be trudging about the woods these days, but might be there's something in there that can help you. Please, I said. I could pick them up today if you're offering. Eager, huh? If you insist. Can't say I have much better to do, Fox said with a shrug. He took a long sip of his beer. I'll buy you lunch first, though. Hell, least I can do for the kid who's taking up the torch, right? I'd appreciate that, Mr. Fox. Yeah, you'd better, he chuckled humorlessly before taking another sip. What do you suppose it is? I asked. I know you said you didn't know for sure, but I don't know. What do you think is out there? Like I said, hell if I know. He repeated, if I had to guess. Subspecies of something. Bear, wolf. I don't know. The woods out here are thick and deep. I've heard people talk of Sasquatch, monsters, demons, and all sorts of strange things. I've never fully bought into all of it. I always figured there was a rational explanation, and that's honestly the best I can come up with. He shrugged. For all I know, it really is Bigfoot out there. Either way, it's killing those people, and clearly it's back. The waitress who brought us our drinks returned with a friendly smile and a charming greeting of, have you boys decided what you'd like to eat? Yeah, I'll go with the Salisbury steak, Fox said without even looking at the menu, and the waitress looked expectantly at me. I hadn't had a chance to go through the menu either, and with the way her eyes lit up with recognition, I didn't get a chance either. Oh, it's you, she said, half surprised and half relieved. She said it as if we'd met before, although I was sure I'd never seen that woman before in my life. You look a lot better today, don't you? Excuse me, I asked. Oh, don't you remember? You were pretty out of it. It was, a few days back. You were on the side of the road. We gave you a ride. I stared at her, unsure just what the hell she was saying, and yet her smile held a sincerity to it that was difficult to argue. You don't remember? She repeated. Sorry, ma'am. I'm afraid you have the wrong person, I said quietly. Fox was looking at me expectantly, one eyebrow raised, and I saw a dejected look cross the waitress's face. She was probably wondering if she'd either really got it wrong, or if I was trying to save face, and she'd embarrass me. Oh, well, maybe I do, she said quietly. I'm sorry. That must have been my mistake. Sorry about that. No worries, I assured her and forced an uncomfortable smile. I guess I've just got one of those faces. I guess you do, she repeated, trailing off slightly before taking a step back. She offered a sheepish smile and left without even taking my order. Another waitress conveniently came along to take it after I'd had a chance to look at the menu. Fox never asked me about what she'd said. I suppose he took it at face value and opted to stay out of it either way. I was grateful for that much. When I left Weston, I had an old box filled with old photographs of paw prints and mud. Fox had been generous in what he'd given me, and I couldn't get home to pore over it all fast enough. I'd stumbled upon the motherlode of DOGMAN evidence. Not enough to truly convince anyone, no. It would take a hell of a lot of proof to ever really be enough. But it was enough for me. I faked sick and took the next day off work just to pore over the photographs and files. Fox had just about everything, including detailed reports of every suspected encounter with whatever creature he thought was behind this. In a 100-kilometer radius of Vegreville, I counted about 12 different supposed attacks from 1990 to 1996, including the Burr family. There were photographs and even 1 or 2 plasters of footprints taken from the scene, but not much in regards to eyewitnesses. Nobody had clearly seen what had attacked those people, and the best information I could find was people describing it as an animal fleeing the scene. It was more information than I'd ever had access to, but nothing definitive. At least the pictures of the prints were enough for me to compare to the pictures I'd taken. Fox had been right when he'd said they'd been similar. However, looking at them side by side, I couldn't help but feel as if the one I'd found was smaller than the one Fox had photographed. I suppose it made some sense. After all, after so many years, it probably wasn't the exact same creature, right? This one could be a juvenile, maybe even the offspring of whatever had begun the attacks, which posed a question. What had triggered the attacks this time? Why had they stopped? Or were they starting again? I saw no real answers. Nothing to explain why any of this was happening, and that question hung uncomfortably over me. It was only a few days later that I heard news of another attack. My digging into what Fox had given me hadn't led me to any shocking new revelations. However, I knew I couldn't turn down the chance to look into another attack. So recent, too. I remember waking up that morning and coming downstairs to see the news on the TV. Mom was watching it intently, dead silent as she did. I remember her eyes fixated me for a moment, studying me more intently than normal. I offered her a comforting smile as I went over to join her. "Did you eat yet?" I asked. "I can make some breakfast if you haven't." No, I'm fine," she rasped and looked back at the TV. She didn't comment on what she was watching, but she didn't need to. I could see the recognition in her eyes as the anchor recounted the same story I'd heard before. Something had entered the house of someone in Vegreville. It had left no survivors. Once I was sure that Mom would be okay on her own for a few hours, I headed out to the neighborhood where the attack had happened. I kept my distance, of course, and parked my car just down the street. I could see flashing police sirens and yellow tape blocking the area off. No way I was going to get close to it, and I wasn't quite interested in trying my luck. I could see a few neighbors speaking to the officers and dared to let myself creep closer. Maybe if I couldn't go in, I could at least ask a few questions. One of the cops looked up at me as I drew nearer. He'd been talking to one of the neighbors, a middle-aged man I'd seen around town from time to time. He stared at me as if I was a ghost. I just chalked it up to shock. "Morning, officer," I said calmly and casually as I could. "What happened here? I'm not at liberty to discuss that." The officer said, his tone stern. He looked me up and down, his brow furrowing. "I've been asked not to let people linger around the crime scene. Best you go home. Let us do our work." Of course. "Sorry," I said, faking a smile. I could see the neighbor he'd been talking to still staring at me, brow furrowed in what looked to be anger. The man looked at the officer, then back to me. Our eyes met for a moment before he spoke. "You? I saw you last night." The officer paused and looked over at the man. He drew closer to me. "I remember the car. I remember you. You're the one I saw heading into their backyard." "Excuse me?" I asked. "Going into these people's backyard? Was this guy crazy?" No, it was you." The man insisted. He looked at the officer now. "That's the guy I was talking about. That's the guy I saw going into the backyard." He'd started raising his voice, and the commotion had drawn another officer. I took a step back and as the man kept shouting, time seemed to become a blur. "Okay, sir. Were you present here last night?" I remember the officer asking. "No," I said. "No, I don't usually go down this street. I was home all last night. You could ask my mom." "I saw you, asshole. Don't you dare lie." The neighbor spat. "I saw your shit-ass car on the street, and I saw you going into their backyard. I saw it, and I've got it on my porch camera." "It wasn't me," I cried. "I wasn't here last night. I can prove it, asshole." The man was in my face then, eyes locked to mine, and screaming. I remember the officer stepping between us, although his posture suggested he was trying to protect the man screaming at me rather than the other way around. In my peripheral vision, I saw two other officers watching me. They seemed too close for comfort. "Sir, would you mind coming down to the station?" he asked. His voice indicated that I didn't have much of a choice. "We just want to ask you a few questions." My mouth suddenly felt dry. I could feel my pulse racing, but I still forced myself to say yes. I'd been at home all night. There was no way it was me that man had seen last night. Was there? At the station, I watched the footage of my own car parking on the street outside what I now knew to be the home of Leon and Taylor Baker, along with their two sons. I could see myself clearly on that footage walking into their backyard. Not a man who looked like me. Me. And I couldn't come up with a single reason why I'd been on that film to the stony-faced detective I'd been in the room with. All I could do was sputter incompetently as he sighed and placed me under arrest. As I was led to a holding cell, I felt like I was in a dream state, ready to wake up at any second. What was happening didn't feel like reality anymore. I felt like I was drifting through something strange and incomprehensible. As I lay down on the cot they provided me, listening to drunkards in the next tank over, my heart was still pounding. My blood was racing so loud I could feel it in my ears. I don't remember falling asleep. I'm not sure if I really did fall asleep. I woke up at home about an hour ago. I don't know how much time I've got. I've seen the news about the police station. Apparently, someone recently escaped one of the holding cells and left 8 officers dead in their wake. That someone wasn't named. And yet the way my mom looked at me when I came downstairs said enough. Her lips were sealed tight and silent tears streamed down her cheeks as I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the TV. I looked over at her and watched as she continued to cry. "I'm sorry," was all she managed to say. "I thought you'd be different than your father. I thought that when he died, this would all be over. I know you didn't mean to do any of it. I know that. He didn't either. It's just that work could be so stressful for him, and when the stress came, it came out." I stared quietly at her, watching her bury her head in her hands. My whole body was trembling. I asked her, "The wolf in him, it's in you too. He never could control it. Oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't think you'd believe it was you. I didn't know what to do. Her final words were cut off into empty sobs, and I quietly withdrew back up the stairs. I don't know if I fully understand what's been happening to me. I realize now that there are gaps in my memory. Things I did that I can't remember. Things I don't think I want to remember. I can hear the police sirens getting closer. I know I don't have much time. I'll try and go peacefully. But I don't know if whatever is in me, whatever was in control during those hours I can't remember, will go without a fight. I think I'm going to die soon. I don't know. I don't know much anymore, but there is one thing I'm sure of. I think I found the DOGMAN of Vegreville. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.